Good afternoon and welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Tom Wick, and I am an engineering manager on the runtime team at Tableau. The runtime team, for those of you who don't know, we're refactoring the visual interpreter pipeline. What's a visual interpreter pipeline? Well, the visual interpreter pipeline is what does the magic between your data and drawing the marks on the screen. So runtime's team's code is deeply involved in every viz from every Tableau product. Today it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Tableau Zen Master Bridget Cogley. Bridget is a master at communicating with data. She's a blogger, she's a senior consultant, and she's also a former American Sign Language interpreter, which is what she says is the reason for this talk today. So after this talk, you'll certainly want to go and check out her profile on Tableau Public. She has a lot of good content there, great dashboards, a lot of great content. And as I said, she's an active blogger on tablewfit.com. She cultivates a growing list of dashboards there as well. But you should go to her blog to learn about the language of data visualization and advice about how best to communicate your points using your data. There are several interesting and educational blog posts there. One that I found particularly useful was The Introvert's Guide to Tableau Conference. That one's surprisingly relevant to some of us. She works at Technion Data Solutions remotely from Columbus, Ohio. Today she's here to share some of her knowledge with us. Her talk today is called Data Ethics, From Headlines to Headway. Please join me in welcoming Bridget Cogley to the stage.
Thank you. So today we are doing data ethics to headlines to headway. And so part of my hope is I'm not going to provide you answers. So if you came here for answers, I'm apologizing now. My goal is that you will walk away with far more questions than answers, and hopefully some more things to think about. A related session is held by Jenny Richards. It was earlier this morning, but if you look for it for the recording, this is kind of somewhat related as far as being a little bit more inclusive. So it's a subset of ethics, but it is a good thing to think about. As was mentioned, I worked before as an American Sign Language interpreter, and so a lot of people look at me and go, how is that relevant? You go from that to where I am today. And so part of that is I was an interpreter, I had a code of ethics, I was certified, I did a lot of training and advising to others. And then lastly, I moved more towards this role in data analysis. The career is a little bit more S-curve than I'll go into. But one conclusion I saw between interpreting and data analysis is that they're not that different. They really do have a lot in common. I'm interpreting for the data. I'm looking at what's being said with data and numbers and trying to bring a human voice to it so that my stakeholders understand. So to me, I really see them as overlapping quite heavily. The world to me was a secret which I desire to divide. Curiosity, earnest research to learn the hidden laws of nature, gladness akin to rapture as they unfolded to me, are among the earliest sensations I can remember. I don't know about you, but I kind of feel that way when I'm working with data. I'm seeing things, I'm learning things, I'm beginning to understand the world in a way that I didn't historically. Anybody here feel that way? The challenge, though, and the reason you're going to find a couple of quotes in here from Frankenstein is that we don't see the monster side of what it is that we create. You know, what I see, what I'm weaving together is beautiful. It's an addition to the world. And unfortunately, what we've found is that that's not always the case. I promised you headlines, right? So this is the big scare, and part of this is because other people share the same passion I do. Other people think they're adding to the world, and what we find is that there's sometimes a disconnect, that we make something, and oftentimes not right away, but later on, something happens, something like, well, is democracy safe? Hey, data's getting bigger, what about privacy? Don't know about you, but it feels like everywhere I go, I get advertisements for Tableau. Anybody? Okay. I'm getting notices about GDPR. I've put my own snarky notice up, so anybody in the UK, you're welcome. Anybody in the US, not relevant to you, but if you are running a website, it is relevant to you. So thinking about just these boundaries, what we do with ethics, and how we handle the data. There's plenty more headlines that I originally put on this, and unfortunately, version control didn't follow me, so some of my data got lost. There you go. So this is a little bit of our reckoning moment. We had this before during World War II with the H-bomb. We're having it now with data. And kind of brings me to a little bit of my Voltaire moment. We know this quote, with great power comes great responsibility. Is anybody here powerful? Okay, we're not doing our poses, are we? Okay. So we get the why. This is why you're here, at least this is why I hope you're here. And so part of what I'm planning to do today is I'm going over what are ethics, if they apply to me or you, if not, and then asking the next two questions of what can I do right now, and what do we need to do long term? That's my goal for this session. So if I do this right, if I actually hit the ball where I'm aiming, nobody's going to walk out of here with answers. In fact, I'm hoping you walk out of here with far more questions than you came in with. Far more. Okay, what are ethics? I think it helps to look at how we make decisions. So we make decisions one of three ways. We look at morals, and this is actually our primary means of deciding things, is morals. The second one is usually laws. So you cannot speed in this area. You should not run over the pedestrians, even though at least I know I've come very, very close, particularly here recently. Ethics also falls into this mix. And we see this word a lot. I know in the past, I've looked at it before and went, I don't quite know what this means. You hear of things like good work ethic. Is that similar to ethics? No, not really. So that is kind of how we make decisions. I'm going to deep dive into these and look at these a little bit more so that way we refine them, because to understand ethics is to also understand morals and laws. So morals are things of how we believe and what we believe we should say and how we eat. Now, these are not topics I want to cover here. I would like to walk out of the session alive, and some of these topics can be quite contentious. So I'm going to pick on something a little lower value, and it may or may not hit. And this is clothing. Anyone have values around clothing? Some of us do, some of us don't. Or so we think. So I'm going to do a silly example. Sometimes I'll do things like meat eating if I've got a different crowd. But today we're at the Tableau conference. I do want to keep it a little bit light. How many people here have a Tableau t-shirt? Good grief, you're a homogeneous crowd. Okay, so you guys had a value today. You said we were at the Tableau conference, out of solidarity, out of something. I'm going to wear a Tableau t-shirt to identify myself. And as you see here, I am extraordinarily original. I figured nobody would recognize me with the hair and the hat, so therefore I had to pick the same shirt even though I was hiding behind a sign. Maybe it's my disguise. So this is our silly example today. And so morals are ways that we decide for ourselves. We have morals around everything. We get them from religion. We get them from our parents. We get them from ourselves. Do you feel strongly about something? Guess what? That's a moral. Morals are personal. We get into laws. Laws are fancy ways of having rules. So we can make rules here at the conference, and we can call it a law. Like I can put it on paper, and I can put a couple signatures on it. We'll call that a law today. Laws generally are rules. Laws, rules. So one law or rule might be, let's say, any picture we take from here on out, everyone's going to hide behind the sign like I do. Or we may say, no, Bridget, sorry, you're wrong. Nobody gets to hide today. So that's a law. It's when we as a group start making decisions and saying, here's a law. And usually there's a good reason. So for example, in New Orleans, I think there seems to be a law that cars must go 25, in the hopes that they will stop. So ethics are where we start to delve a little bit into philosophy. We start to ask ourselves questions about these two and say, well, do I have the right to make that decision? And maybe you make those decisions that you make for a particular reason. So for example, I hide behind a sign and maybe there's a good reason. We start really thinking about it when we deal with ethics. So that's really ethics. So in a nutshell, ethics are philosophy. And when you deal with ethics, particularly when you get into a code of ethics, you start looking at these terms that pop up. So these are values that we typically share, usually in a profession or in a particular setting. And we'll use words like beneficence. This is a fancy way of saying, does it help? We'll look at things like autonomy. So do you have the right to make that decision? And letting others make decisions that they should be able to make. Privacy. Do you care about your privacy? It feels like that's becoming less and less today. Anyone care about it? Sanctity of life, confidentiality, and justice. These are terms that we hear a lot because they are values that we share in some way, but then we have morals that we don't share around those values. So confused? I hope. We've got morals, individual. Laws tend to go geopolitical. Ethics are typically something we do on someone else's behalf. So that is one key thing to walk away with for today. Understanding that ethics have to do with something on somebody else's behalf. Okay, so we know what ethics are. Do they apply to me? You'll notice I put this in parentheses because at the end of the day, my focus is on ethics. Data ethics being a subset. We deal with data, but ultimately you're dealing with ethics today. So my friends, do you touch data? Do you influence lives? And when I say this, people go, oh, no, I have no influence of lives. I'm not a doctor. Well, do you do workforce analysis? Could somebody lose their job over something that you've done? Could we change how somebody does a job based on what you're doing? Could we make a decision that has an effect down the line on a human? I've got a wonderful friend here, Mike Cisneros, and he's done a dashboard before where he says, most of the data that we touch has to tie back to humans usually. And it was a really powerful statement, so that really stuck with me. Do you hold specialized knowledge? Have unique or broad experience? So if you're sitting here and you're a manager, you're going, nope, not me, I'm safe. No, my friends, sorry. Oversee or direct people that qualify. You're on the hook too. So in the past, it used to be we were technicians. We were the hands that kind of did the stuff. Whether it was coding, whether it was charts, whether it was, okay, I'm going to put the data here. What we could do at that time was fairly limited, both by the conclusions we were able to draw, but then also by the data itself. So you think about technicians, and our influence was fairly limited. It was safe to kind of bumble and fumble around in our bubble. We know this from things like quarterly reports. Do quarterly reports do a ton? Not usually, because somebody else with more knowledge than me is usually making the decision when dealing with quarterly reports. So at the end of the day, if I'm a technician, I trust that others share the knowledge I have and or could get the knowledge I have within a reasonable time frame. Does it sound true today? Somewhere, at some point in time, there was a shift. We had a bunch of disparate data. Initially, we were kind of guessing, can we put this stuff together? Can we come up with some conclusions? Well, maybe this, maybe that. And then what happened at some point is we started getting more data. And Adam Solipsky did me a wonderful favor this morning. He showed me this wonderful, awesome hockey chart of data. Wish I was able to steal it because it was far more resonant than what I got here. But we have more density, we have more depth, and then we also have this really nifty ability, depending on how you look at it, which is I can pretty much identify you from your data in some way. We've got enough of it now from all these different angles. We can say, hey, you, I know you bought that thing. Do you want to buy more? Do you want to buy this? And so we went from guessing to this cute way of making profiles and gaming. So with your data, I now know who you are, and I can start rigging your life and experiences. Do we have any psychologists or people in the social sciences doing experiments? you know I'm going to go towards IRB. Do you know those words? I saw the hands in the back. I've got some heads nodding. IRB, International Review Board, I believe. And so normally when you people do experiments, you have to get approval. You have to go through a board. You've got all these papers to fill out. And somebody has to say, yes, you're not going to do harm. Now, if you sign my EULA, I don't necessarily have to go through that process because I can kind of just test under the code. So that's some things to think about. So now we have this different model, and this is what I'm proposing today. This is not necessarily in concrete, but I think we're no longer hands that do. I think we're minds that think. I think we have influence, and we care about that influence. I think what we do can affect reality. I also realize that there are no constraints. There's all the data in the world, it feels like. And so the only limits to what I do with that data is me. And my influence sometimes is longer than I realize. I can start something today, and 5, maybe 10 years down the road, the results of that are still playing out. I also have knowledge that is not shared easily and cannot readily be explained to other people I'm working with. So I can do these things. I have a hard time articulating to others the long-term ramifications. Cue Frankenstein. Beware, for I am fearless and therefore powerful. So what can I do? At what point do I start going, okay, now I know I can do these things. I'm powerful, right? Are we feeling powerful? Oh, the room's gone silent. So, speed bumps ahead. What do we do when roadways feel a little unsafe and we've got a lot of people moving around? We put in speed bumps. And ideally, people care enough about their cars to slow down. Ideally. So my speed bump for ethics are things like asking questions. Start asking and understanding what's going on, and then clarifying. That's great. That doesn't give me any framework, and I at least promised you some headway, right? So this is an actual process used by interpreters throughout the world. It is called demand control schema. And so you can see the demand. So the demand, if I am interpreting, for example, starts out where I have ambiguity and something doesn't feel right. So I might be working on a project and something doesn't feel right. Maybe something doesn't feel right about the ask. So then I start thinking about it. And this is where I start defining. So you remember those values I put up before where we talked about things like beneficence and privacy. Those are really good terms to start articulating that ambiguity in, where you start looking at, okay, maybe I am touching on privacy. Maybe I am, like I think I'm helping people, but maybe I'm perhaps infringing on autonomy because I'm also infringing on privacy. And so that's where you start seeing those values collide, hence ethical dilemma. So we start defining and identifying, then we move into our controls. Well, what can I do about it? I understand what's going on and what's happening in this picture. So now, what can I do next? Are there solutions? And this is where you don't have to say, this is the answer. In fact, I don't want you to. I want you to come up with every possible solution, even the bad ones. Because you're not going to act on it yet. You're going to then review. You're going to start looking at these solutions and going, are they good? Can I maybe take this, what seems like a bad solution, and use that to create a good solution? And then lastly, after you've reviewed, and you can even seek other people for that review, then you decide. And that might be you go to your boss and say, I don't know that we should do what we're doing in this way. So, again, still feels very loose, still feels very ambiguous, so I'm going to give you a cheat sheet. It's very, very long, it's got lots of colors. Feel free to take pictures. I'm even going to pause. Does anyone here do workforce analysis? Have you ever been told, okay, we need to figure out, how much of X we can fit into Y, or we need to figure out, okay, how little time can it take to do jobs? So you think about like making beds, you think about in retail. Okay, I need to check out so many items in an hour. How many of you have done that job? No? Okay. So thinking about what happens down the line, because often what happens, especially as analysts, we are so far removed from what we're analyzing and evaluating that we may not know what a job entails. So we may, for example, do a workforce analysis. And if I'm doing a workforce analysis on, say, how many beds can be made in an hour, do I know who's getting the analysis? Do I know what decisions they're going to make from it? What about gaps? What knowledge gaps do I have? What knowledge gaps does the person receiving this have? What narrative should I add? Should I add anything about, well, on average, all the beds here are king and queen size, because does it matter if it's a twin versus queen? I've made twin beds, I've made queen beds, there's a massive difference. And then who is being analyzed? Because we know, for the most part, a lot of our data deals with people. So who am I analyzing? Do they have any control of this data? Do they have any control over how I'm storing it? Do they have any control over what I'm doing with it? Do they really get to opt in? And then have I seen what is being analyzed or who is being analyzed for myself? Do I understand what's going on? What does this data represent? How is it collected? Do people have consent in that collection? How is this data being collected and in what setting? So if you think about I'm analyzing workforce analysis, and I notice that people are consistently 3 to 5 minutes late. Why? And then someday I go and I look and I realize there's one time clock and a queue that forms up this long, and that's why, because person A gets there 9 minutes early to clock in on time, so that person B, who gets there on time, waits in line and doesn't get to clock in on time. They were all on time, but because of systems, they were not. So just understanding that there's reality and then what we see, and that data is a subset of reality. Why am I doing this? So how low of data do I need to go? Am I perhaps going too granular when I don't need to? Am I asking for more information than I really need? What knowledge gaps do I have? Am I making assumptions about groups of people or the job or things like that without really understanding it? Again, really harping in on that, what assumptions am I making? Because could somebody get hurt? If I set a target too high, somebody could. Have I seen it again? And then what could go wrong? So really kind of what I call Franken-checking your work. So as I start going, oh, well, I'm making this beautiful thing, what could go wrong? And it's hard for us to ask that. We really see the best in our work. And then lastly, have I checked and shown all the steps? So have I really made sure that everybody who should be involved is involved? And again, really looking at where can this go wrong. It really helps if you're paranoid. If you're not, find a paranoid friend to teach you to be paranoid. Highly recommend it. Probably one of the best examples I've found actually comes from Makeover Monday. And I'm going to show you what stopped me in my tracks next. It's not this slide. But what Makeover Monday does is they say, hey, here's a chart, here's some data. Do your own take on it. And, so a lot of people did all these different takes on it. That's not the part I'm critiquing, but you think about, okay, well, what could go wrong with this information? So this is cancer death rates by type. And so you're doing all these visualizations, you're putting this out into the world, and okay, great. We've all seen this, right? We've all seen Kaplan curves, we've all seen kind of where, we've talked about either death rates or survival rates, and, here's cancer, and we see this trend, and a lot of it's going down, and that's all exciting. I found this reminder that somebody put up absolutely just stopped me in my tracks, and I hope it does you. And so for the people in the back, what this says is you are not a statistic. 31%. A woman diagnosed with cervical cancer will read that the 5-year survival rate is 69%. And what she will see is 31% don't make it in 5 years. So 5-year survival estimates don't tell the full story. Talk to your doctors, understand your diagnosis and your treatment plan. You are not a statistic. And I begged her to use this, and the story is that she herself had had cancer once before. And so She knows, and she's been there. And so I think that's a powerful thing that we don't often think about, because we only know what we know. We know our experience. And even the scientific method is really ultimately a way to extend our experience, but it too is limited. And so that's why it's really powerful to check ourselves with each other and have that kind of support. So this is the Ohio School Report Card. So this is data from Ohio schools. This is actually part of a very old visualization I did way back in the day, just partly to get a job, but then partly to kind of explore and extend what they had. So you were able to download their data. And so my take on it was, well, I wonder if I could find a good school for my child. And so you can look at reading, you can look at science, you can look at math, you can look at all the different areas schools are in, and then you can also kind of view it by different demographic categories such as economics, you can view it by gender, you can view it by race, you can view it by special needs. What could potentially go wrong with this? Feel free. Okay, so all the students end up in a different school? In one school. Okay, so we could have a teacher that works really well with one student and not others.
Users or parents decide to segregate their children and send them to certain schools for racial reasons.
Parents decide to segregate their children from certain schools for racial reasons. I'm also leaving out data illiterate parents. I also had somebody mention, I could overload a school. So, these are all reasons that could happen from this. And, I have studied ethics, I have thought about this stuff, I've worked with a number of populations, and yet I still did it. So, I hope at this point, this is the climax, people, so I'm really hoping at this point you're feeling like this. And if my font is too terrible, it says ethical dilemmas everywhere. And I love this meme because I feel like I'm Buzz Lightyear right now, and I'm hoping everybody here is Woody. I'm really hoping. So at this point, this is the really key part to me, and that is, what do we do long term? Because I can teach you ethics, and you can go out and study ethics, and you can start being as ethical as possible. But then what happens? What happens when you, out of ethics, say, I can't do this, I shouldn't do this, this is dangerous, we should not go there, this is really risky. Could you ethics yourself out of a job? Quite possible. So this is the final part, and that is to make the change we want, we absolutely must unify. So this is where, if I had a flag, if I didn't think I'd fall down the stairs, I'd run down yelling and screaming, unify, unify, unify. So my steps to this, there is a model. There are other what are called practice professions. So I'm proposing we are a practice profession, everybody in this room. I'm proposing we're part of a profession just like doctors, just like lawyers, just like all kinds of people who are out there with a code of ethics, who are out there doing work where they hold more knowledge than you about a particular thing. The first thing I'm saying we need to do is identify who and what we are. This goes back to, I don't even know what I should call my work. Am I a data scientist? Am I an analyst? Am I a dashboard maker? Am I a developer? If you have an answer, I will take it. So we need to start identifying who we are. The other thing is we need to start defining. So we define the profession. We start out saying, well, what is it? And then we do this really cool thing. We start normalizing. We start saying, hey, there's standards. And then we certify. Now, I know some of you have taken various certification tests through Tableau. This is not that. And I'll dive into that a little bit more. And then lastly, we need to do this really either cool or evil thing. Legislate. So what does that look like? When we identify, we start saying who's in, who's out. I'm hoping everybody in this room is in, because you've had the ethics presentation. So I want you guys in. But we start to, does this include the data warehouse people? Does this include the analyst? Does this include the person using Excel? I don't have the answer. Who's in, who's out? Once we identify that, then we need a name. Are we data workers? Are we analysts? Are we data scientists? I don't know. I'll take the one that has like the biggest paycheck though. What skills are involved? What skills do we need to do this job? And we actually standardize on these. So if you look at doctors, they have a certain set of standards they all must know. They have specialties. That's not to say you wouldn't have other things, but they have specialties too. And then we start formalizing on proper education. You guys would get grandfathered in. Hopefully I would get grandfathered in. With that, we also have the normalizing part. We start making these standards of practice. We actually put these things on paper. We say, these are the things we do, these are the things we won't do, and these are boundaries. And then we all agree to follow it. So this is that solidarity part that's a little risky. So it's not, I agree to this, and then you undercut me and you do it. It's that we all agree, and we all either do or do not. There is no try. And then lastly, well, second to lastly, we certify. And this is, again, a model I'm very familiar with. So through the RID, I was a RID certified interpreter for 9 years. And what I had to do was I did a practical written task, basically showing I knew the code of ethics, I knew all about my language, I knew all about practices that we should follow. And then I did an actual formal interpreting where I did that for 3 or 4 hours. And my skills were evaluated. And then I had to go get continuing education and renew it. And so that's the type of certification I'm talking about, where it's a little bit less vendor specific and more focused on the industry. So a nonprofit industry would hold it. And then two, those standards of practice continue to evolve. You have people who get certified, provide feedback, and then we continue to change our minds. So we're not locked in. Once we do this, we're not locked in. We can continue to change our mind about who's in, who's out, what we should do, what the education should be. Then, after we've got enough organization, we've got enough people certified, we approach and we start legislating. We start saying, okay, we need to not just protect us. I mean, that's a part of it. We want to protect us, but then we also want to protect others. And so you see, for example, we've got GDPR. And the goal of that is to somewhat protect others. Doesn't go and do the full shebang, so the world still has more of my information than I could ever imagine, so I will continue to get Tableau advertisements even though I've got multiple licenses. So that is my goal, and so I'm asking you, I don't have all the answers, I'm hoping you have a lot of questions, I'm hoping you're thinking, okay, well now what do I do? Who do I contact? I have a list of very limited resources. It is evolving. I feel like this conversation has amped up in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I've looked around and, hey, this new publication came out, Ethics and Data Science. DJ Patil, Hillary Mason, and Mike Lukaitis. Open ebook on data ethics. That's really cool. Datapractices.org, I know Ben Jones has been involved in this, so you guys are skipping his session to come to mine. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then AI Now. So again, is AI a part of this? I don't know, you tell me. IDEO on Medium is doing this really awesome blog series on design and data and talking about ethics. Of course, I'm going to plug my blog because that's what I do. You're also welcome to find me on Twitter. And then Carla Gentry has just been a wealth of knowledge. Like, she puts out a lot of stuff. She's only on Twitter, but that is kind of where I've been getting my knowledge. And now we'll jump to, please fill out your survey. Really appreciate it, really helps identify what sessions they should do more of. And that is all I've got for you today. So I'm hoping you have lots and lots and lots of questions. Or you can run out screaming, and I will forgive you. Just, again, nice survey results. I've got a question over here. Do we have either a walking mic, or I can repeat the question, or your resonant baritone, but that may or may not work. We will happily do lapel mics. I think we got another mic coming. Excellent. Can I go one slide back? Evolving list of resources. So there you go. You're more than welcome to copy this. I did not do the nice thing in Bitly. I'm sorry. So you get things like Medium and AI 276. Yes. Sorry.
So I'm thinking of a hypothetical company. Let's call it Schmoogle.
Okay,
which
schmoogle.
is whose pattern of making money is based on ever more deep knowledge of people's data, and who may have a lot of lobbying power with legislators.
I agree.
Okay. What is the strategy of bringing them into the right side of the issue? And their money, which they like.
So the one thing is we must unify. So the more of us that we can yell loudly. The other thing, voting with your dollars. So if you find a platform that you're not comfortable with, so I won't name any names. There are certain social media platforms you will never find my name on. And so making those decisions, also developers, developing your own solutions is helpful too, but the key one is really that unification piece, really getting enough of us yelling to help shift the tide. And I know that's not the answer anybody wants, because it's like, great, I'm gonna yell into the void. It does take time. The ASL interpreters organized in 1964, and they got together at Ball State, they sat down, and they formed the RID. They put their names on paper and said, we are interpreters. Awesome. And then like in the 70s, they got together and said, we should start testing. We should start making formal education. We should put some standards out. This is the 70s. And then they said, well, people should start using certified interpreters. So when do you think using a certified interpreter became law? Anybody? Anybody? When did it become required? When did it become law to use a nationally certified American Sign Language interpreter? It hasn't happened yet. Certain states have put that in law, but it still hasn't happened. So no, change is not fast. And the best thing we can do is A, vote with our dollars. So consumers have demanded certified interpreters. Certain states have heard them. So you can start small and kind of affect change that way. Certain states also lead in that. But no, unfortunately, I don't have a satisfactory answer. I know that.
I was wondering if you have any resources on within an analytics department coming up with a standard of ethics and talking with business partners about that.
So part of it is standards of practice. You can also develop your own code of ethics, and that's one way. So the resource I've got where they've, so datapractices.org has some kits on that, and I would say go to that link because they have a code of ethics that would be good to share. And then also having a department, so having some sort of ethical recourse and having a way to start normalizing that as values, but then also building a department that has some kind of policing and or legal authority within that organization is helpful.
Thank you.
We're moving over to this side.
At a very high level, could you just describe what the code of ethics is like for interpreters?
So they have these awesome preambles. They're usually really, really long. So 7 pages minimum is required, single-spaced, sometimes 10-point font, 12-point font. You have a preamble. So this is where you say, as an organization, we have these values. We're trying to do this. So you lay down the land and say, this is what we're going to do. And then you say, here's value 1. And to support value 1, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And this is what we shall do. And then to support value 2, da-da-da-da-da-da, this is what we should do. And then you have about like 7 to 9 values. You don't want to go beyond that. Like if you have 12 values, you lose people. So 7 to 9 values is good. Any more than that, not good. Too little, not enough. You won't meet your page quota. And then finally you say, we, this group, agree to adhere to this code of ethics under penalty of losing my certification and being sent off to the field. I agree to follow this, sign here, and date. That is typically what your code of ethics looks like. Fancy seals are welcome. Circular logos are also awesome. And policing authority helps too. So being able to actually kick people out helps. You can put them together. You can make all kinds of codes of ethics, but if you don't actually have the ability to do anything, they tend not to be effective. Then they just tend to be like solidarity pledges. We all know what happens with pledges, particularly if you've been in fraternities. They end up puking. More questions, more questions. I have one final question maybe?
Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you.
Well, if I go to that company website and they show a message about cookies,
Yes.
Should I close the website? Should I say yes?
So that is
Should
the
I never
other-
go back to that site?
I agree. That is the other unfortunate part. So right now, you typically just agree. Now, GDPR makes it so that it shows up as EU, I believe. I'm sure I've got somebody here who knows better than I do about specifically what GDPR says. But unfortunately, some agreements that exist out there, you're not really agreeing to anything because you don't really have much choice. It's either you use it or you don't. And so I've got my snarky GDPR that's over here. I hid it. If anybody actually wants to come up and read my very snarky GDPR, that is it. Pardon me. It says things like, my neighbors can see through. Like when I was growing up, I had curtains, and so you couldn't see in the house. Well, unfortunately, not only do we not have curtains anymore, we have glass houses, so you can see everything. And also that my neighbors have binoculars. So that is my extraordinarily snarky GDPR statement, not because I disrespect it, but just because partly I'm in the States and I don't really get these rights, and then partly because, when I was growing up, I really was told, like, close your blinds. And now we don't really have that option. So, does that answer the question? Okay.
So at our organization, we're starting to get ready for the California consumer rights law that was recently passed.
Mm-hmm.
It compares to GDPR a little bit, but not a heavy overlap. One of the things we're noticing, and I don't think it applies for us, but just generally speaking on ethics, it seems to put an undue burden on some smaller organizations. How do you find that balance between wanting to do ethical things without putting a heavy burden on any size company, but especially smaller businesses?
I agree that's the challenge, and some of it is the more we normalize it, the more tech solutions will start to follow and make it easier. The other part is too, really just stopping and looking and thinking. I mean, it's the challenge of how do we do what we want to do, but do so maybe looking a little bit further ahead, reaching out, doing a little bit more research. So sometimes you can do focus groups, those are really great. You can sometimes lure people in with free food, and they will give you free advice. It's a little unfair, but it does work. Unfortunately, though, especially when you move into legislation, the smaller businesses do have an undue burden. I mean, that is the challenge. I am a small business owner myself, and we run a very small engineering firm, and it's like, okay, I've got to pay for insurance in case this thing rolls on my toe. It is the challenge. And I will say the cost of business does get more and more expensive, too. I don't know if that answers it. Okay.
So in terms of current Tableau functionality, what do you see as strengths or impediments to implementing ethical practices in a company?
So for me, I would say just what I'm able to do in Tableau. Like, I'm able to do a lot. And so to me, I would say slowing down, like realizing I am extraordinarily powerful. And I would say the more I can slow down and go, okay, and making sure I'm not necessarily pulling in too much information. Like, is this information really necessary for this analysis, or am I just pulling it in because I think it's cool? And then, okay, I'm pulling it in because I think it's cool. What effect does that have on somebody else long term? Am I accidentally shaping the path towards something that maybe becomes punitive or becomes untenable for somebody doing a particular job? I would say stuff like that. I mean, the tool itself is really powerful at letting me put things together. I will say that. Like, I've been amazed at what I'm able to find just with the data sets I have access to. And then going back beyond Tableau, looking at what am I getting from people? Am I asking too much? Am I providing people a way out? So my Columbus Tug has a lot of data fields, and they ask, like, where do you live, and what do you want to get from this? And I'm always the butthead that doesn't put in my phone number, that doesn't put in the right zip code, and that's me. So there is the snarky, bad data collection, so I'm that person.
At the time when we talk about fake news and the responsibility of journalism, do you feel like we analysts, particularly because of the access to it, to the data that we have and the field of data visualization, that we have an obligation to almost adhere to the same kind of code that journalists, not Fox News, have to?
Thanks. Excellent phrase question. We definitely should. And I go back to this dashboard in particular because it's a great reminder of we get all this information, we're often removed from it. And we don't often think about what does somebody else interpret from it. And sometimes we don't even have access to that audience that's getting the analysis. So when Kate did this, I was blown away because it's when you're not in that world, you don't think of this stuff. And so sometimes running that stuff by somebody else, just to burst your own bubble, per se, to realize what you are saying and are not saying. I can't espouse this example enough. It's a fantastic reminder of what you don't often think you're saying. And so that's probably the best way I can answer that, is just really, if you don't have that code of ethics available, try to make your own, try to burst your bubble, try to make sure you really are saying what you're saying, and then potentially even put out the limitations of what you've done. And I think that's where lately anybody on Tableau Public has been including their data source. Just that alone is helpful. And I think to being able to tie back to, okay, this is what I'm doing, providing that insight, providing in the description some of the limitations of what you've done. Okay, well, I don't know where we are on time. I don't have a watch, and I left my phone with people smarter than me. We're at 10 minutes? We were at 15. Oh, wow. We have more questions. Okay.
When you say the unite and unify, and in a company like that one, should we build this code of ethics and also coordinate with the legal department?
So I would love to say yes to that. The challenge is we've got to have a code of ethics, we've got to have standards, we've got to have enough people behind us to really make that change in legislation. I mean, again, with my interpreter example, they rallied together in 1964. It's not for lack of want. They've been kind of banging on doors, hey, certified interpreters, hey, certified interpreters. But we have to prove the value of it. We have to prove that there is a reason we want to do this, and it's because maybe people do feel like their privacy is being infringed upon. Maybe it's that there are things being determined. We are making a world that we may or may not want to live in. It's the classic, you eat here, you go to the restroom over here. We don't want to put these things together. And so making sure that we're not making a hostile world. And we can with data. We are very powerful. And we can do things, and other people can be very nefarious, and we may not be nefarious, but other people can be, and use our stuff for a different means than what we intended without us realizing it.
I'll take one, actually. Sorry if I cut someone off. I don't know quite how to phrase this question, but this example strikes me very clearly because I actually work with cancer statistics every day. And I feel like if you do it incorrectly, there are two camps. There's the people who understand the data, but they manipulate it in a way that is just incorrect. But there are more often than not just people who don't understand the data well enough, and they don't know what they don't know.
Yes.
So how do we go about helping people understand the limits of their own knowledge when they really don't know that they don't know what a mortality rate is, for example?
Yes, so my best and probably not nice example is there is often you get people in church who sign. And so they're attempting to interpret a concept that is extraordinarily difficult. I was a certified interpreter for 9 years, and I was never brave enough to try, because how do you convey a concept like grace or these other concepts, and understanding in what construct that they're attempting to explain these things? So when you back that up with data, I feel that data literacy is what I would call a third-tier skill. So you have to know how to read, you have to understand numeracy, and within numeracy, things like statistics. And then you get to this data and making charts. So 3 layers. Like, you've got to go that high to understand what it is we're doing. And so part of it is we as authors or creators we must do our part to help make things accessible. But then when you've got practitioners who are not there, that's again why you've got interpreters rallying. You must use certified interpreters. That's why I've got my rally code where not only should we be organized, but we need to identify. We need to know what we are and what we are not. So that's that who's in, who's out. And being able to say, well, you're out. You're not to this level. You shouldn't be touching this, and you're dangerous, my friend. And I feel that way about a lot of times. Sometimes it's been said, like with ASL interpreters, oh, you should go do this. It's like, no, I'm too dangerous to do that. If I'm too tired and I go and interpret an emergency encounter, I could kill somebody. And these are, or if I'm not skilled in mental health interpreting, I have actually been part of the crew reversing a forced institutionalization. And so with interpreting, it's a lot easier to see because you're right in front of the people. With data, we are so far removed, and we as humans, I personally don't feel do that well with abstraction, So it's imagine one person, and picture that person very clearly. Think about them, wonder what they're doing. Okay, imagine 10 people. Okay, now I need you to imagine 1,000,000 people. Can you do it? I can't really. Like I have a very rough construct of 1,000,000 people. I could say 15,000, but then you guys might envision the keynote earlier. That's not fair. So it's that abstraction piece. So I do think having these that's why we need to make the headway. That's why we need to do the call, because you do have people out there who don't know their harm. So I think my brain over here had a question. I apologize, but she's helping me this week.
So as I think about this, one of the things that comes to me is how granular do you make your standards? I can give you lots of areas of ethics, and sometimes they, in my profession especially, they get kind of funny because mice don't have personal privacy.
Right.
We're like okay with that, but patients, on the other hand, you do in fact want them to be anonymized, and yet you can kind of tell that it would be really easy to just backwork any of this stuff if you knew how to do it and if you tried.
So,
but then there are other issues that are maybe less life and death impactful, like attribution and that sort of thing. So how granular do you get with your standards?
So that's the real beauty of when you organize. So you make the standards, you try to aim fairly high initially. And then what happens is you get chapters. So there's an educational interpreters chapter, there's a medical interpreters chapter, because there are certain needs that are unique to specific things. And so there might be a chapter where it's more specific to, in this case, because of this is a subchapter. But you want to start with that high level, and overall this, and then there's this awful thing that happens with interpreters and ethics. Well, this is the one gray area, you do the opposite. Sorry, I told you, more questions than answers.
Well, can you guys make revision, so if suddenly the world is new and there's some new aspect of it, can you guys make revisions without killing each other?
Ideally, yes. Again, it goes back to the organizing. You pick your leaders, you find a group, you find common values. And sometimes it is a battle. It's not always pretty. At one point, a bunch of deaf stakeholders didn't feel their needs were being accurately captured, half the people getting the interpretation. So they made their own chapter, and they said, we're going to do this. You do that, we're going to do this. And then it was competing, and then they came together after 20 years. So it's always messy. Anything dealing with humans is messy, and unfortunately, this will be messy. I guarantee you one thing. There will be fights. It will be messy. We will not come to an immediate consensus because who's in, who's out? We don't like that. It's the kid at dodgeball. I was always out. And we feel bad when people are out, hopefully.
So the pace of data is growing obviously exponentially, as well as all of the technical capabilities around it. I totally agree over time this process will get there, but the fact is much worse than is happening now is likely to happen before any of us are able to implement this type of process.
Yeah.
What is there that we can do to help socialize at this point in time, particularly in organizations? This conference, there are 17,000 people and maybe 100 people in this room. that shows that this is not on the top of everyone's mind.
Mm-hmm. No, it's not.
How do we raise visibility of this now, and how can we carry out these discussions in such a way that we don't unnecessarily lose our jobs in the process?
I agree. And part of that is some of what I'm trying to do. So I'm doing this presentation. I hope others will take some variation, do some research, and also do some presentation. A lot of this is call to action. You're seeing people on Medium. So just like I had mentioned, where the conversation just started, like it was here when I put this together as a talk. And then all of a sudden, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I saw data ethics everywhere. And people are sending me headlines, and people are saying, did you see this? Did you see this? Did you see this? So people are talking about it. I would say amplify that. Start having conversations. Start reading resources. Start bringing it into your organization. And then just to your question, how do I not ethics myself out of a job? Understand that this is evolving. Like the right choice might be here, and unfortunately we might make the not as right choice, but we're starting to get there because yes, I need to keep my job. And we start talking, we start forcing, we may move to different jobs where we can be more ethical. So with interpreters, we had different models of, okay, I'm your helper, I'm not your helper at all. And okay, fine, I'll help you here. And so it is this pendulum shift. And you're gonna see that a lot, especially as we do start to organize, as we do start to evolve. But it's going to feel very willy-nilly. It's not going to feel satisfying. You're gonna feel like I really should make this decision, but unfortunately because of reality, so that's that where you've got that decision-making tool where you may end up picking the decision that kind of still sucks, but at the time keeps you employed, protects people to an extent, but isn't necessarily the one you want to do. And that's that whole ethical dilemma, value conflict. And unfortunately, that is the answer. And even as interpreters, even for as formalized as we were, we still had times where we wanted to do this, but we could only do this. And a lot of times too, it's you are powerful, but most of you, if not all of you, have a boss. And bosses are really powerful, even more powerful than me. So there is that challenge, unfortunately. So there's no good answer to that either. Like I said, more questions than answers.
Hello.
Hi.
It's possible that your the who's in, who's out addresses this, but like the movement towards open data, where more and more people have access to data, like how do we, I mean, they're not technically data practitioners, or are they? Or how do you square the pursuit of ethics with the pursuit of open data, which is also a good thing?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Very much like interpreters. So it's you've got bilingual individuals, you've got interpreters. Where do you find that line? Hi, I know 5 signs, and I'm going to use them over and over again. How many times did we see, fake interpreters show up? And it's still happening. So, I mean, that is the challenge. It's I'm going to run into this job, I'm not qualified, and I'm going to do it anyway. And so being organized, we can at least call it out. So the deaf community was calling out fake interpreters. Interpreter associations have called them out. And unfortunately, that's our best bet. And then ultimately, you rally around and organize to where you can eventually change the law that says you must have X background or X certification to do this. Or sometimes you can petition those organizations making data open to at least say, okay, can you limit the sharing to where I have to at least prove this to you. So I've had to email companies before to get their data and say, hey, can I use this file? Yes, no, here's my background, here's what I want to do with it. So there may be, again, putting in those speed bumps, which we don't like, because it's so nice to go click, boom, got data. And unfortunately, sometimes we need to slow that down to maybe where we don't click, boom, have the data. We actually have a review process. I'm also being told we are wrapping up. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope this was valuable. Again, I will be blogging about this, as well as other resources. I'm on Twitter. Thank you guys so much.